Jeff Petersen, it's really good to have you here. I haven't seen you in a year and a half. Is that right?
You were in Salt Lake City in June. Yeah, so in person since June of last year. And then I saw you via Hangouts in, I think around November of last year, or September. I can't
Yeah. Yeah, that was a fun meeting in Salt Lake because we just hung out in the hotel room all afternoon, right? And just did
Yeah,
endless interviews and yeah.
down the lobby with, my friend Robert, who did the interview with us, and then smuggled some wine up and had some there.
Our connection is a little weak. Let me just shut down some tabs here real quick. Make sure that I'm not the fault of it. Uh, let's close this out here real quick. Okay. Anyway, the reason I'm interviewing you today is because you've been a prolific author on Liberty.me, and your sort of most elaborate article so far has concerned the sort of rhetoric of persuading of people to become anarchists, which is to say, giving up the need for the state. What led you to want to write that article?
I think it's really and to be specific, it's more bridging the gap between minarchists and limited government libertarians and anarchists. And I think it's just what led me to it is there's a couple of premises actually behind the article, and I think that as a libertarians, most of us all kind of get the idea, the moral argument of taxation is theft, and they also, most libertarians are economically sound, so they kind of already get the economic arguments for having a free society when it's things like misallocation of resources and things like that they already know. And I think that as libertarians, that economic arguments, while they're not as significant as possible ethical arguments, I think that they're more convincing. But at the same time, as a libertarian, being a limited government libertarian is that there's still that idea that we still need to have rules. And it was after reading, it was Knock, Our Enemy of the State,
Right.
and For New Liberty, how they tend to use their allegories, their rhetoric to kind of make people think outside the box, kind of push them to the edge. Because at that point, once you start getting people to start thinking outside their box and question it, then they start to think, okay, well, you have a point. How will these things work? So I guess the article was in a way to kind of push, get people outside their comfort zone. Because the first step, I think, is to start to question the legitimacy of the state. And then at that point, they start thinking or looking for alternate solutions. They think, okay, yeah, you have a point. But how would we, then at that point, they start looking into how it could be done. Like, the famous example of Murray Rothbard and his shoes, how it would be privatized if it was finally privatized. That's an example. They say, okay, well, that's a good point, but how would we kind of get them to start questioning it and they start thinking about other alternatives?
Yeah, I totally get your point about practicalities. I understand this. I mean, you can be convinced of a general principle, but unless you're sort of intellectually prepared to embrace the consequences of that, we might hold back. I know in my case on issues like intellectual property or security and some of these other issues, it was the practical arguments that kind of put it over the top for me. Like I was prepared to embrace anarchism, the free market on principle, but I didn't feel that sort of that passion or that conviction yet that would really fully work in reality.
Yeah, and especially like security. I mean, I raise a point in my article that there's the argument: what if people come in, from India, sorry, not India, but China and Russia and take us over if we're in a stateless society? And while I don't address how private securities or defense would be done, I'd start to I question that argument. It's like, for instance, like if we're in a stateless society, or sorry, a limited government society, what's to prevent, someone with a larger military coming in to take us over, China or Russia? So, I mean, by that logic, wouldn't we need to have a larger military to prevent that? So, I mean, so I kind of question, how do you correlate, how do you reconcile, a large government with a limited government? Sorry, a large military with a limited government. So then I bring in how, with times of war, the government has used that to intervene in other places of the economy. So really, the best way that you're going to be insured by a conquering force is going to have a super duper military and a super duper big sized government. And at the same time, people are going to say, okay, you don't need to have a large military industrial complex. You can also have just a strong national defense, but at that same time, military superiority doesn't ensure that you're going to be victorious, because if that's the case, Vietnam may have worked out differently. We may have taken over in Afghanistan already, but those are certain things that I bring into question. So, it's sometimes certain things that limited government libertarians may not think about.
Right. I was thinking this morning back on the debates in the 19th century in France over this very question, when Gustave de Molinari wrote his great essay called Production of Security, and it caused all of his colleagues to reject his argument. Even people like Bastiat said, no, this goes too far. You can't just have a world completely without a state. Ultimately, you have to have it. So this debate goes way back, and I think it's very interesting that 150 years later we're still struggling with these issues. Although probably in light of the 20th century, we have less excuse to believe in a government monopoly of security than we did, in the 19th century. I mean, we've seen the effects, right? It's been a century of calamity.
Especially with what you mentioned with Libertarian Girl or Marianne the other day with the Ferguson, that they're bringing the legitimacy of the state or monopoly on force much more into question.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Well, it's good you're addressing these practical issues. For you personally, was there a time when you finally gave up your conviction of the state, and how long ago was that, and what was your sort of ideological heritage before that?
I think where it hit me was around September of 2012. It was a couple of things. One was how, of course, Ron Paul was treated during the primaries, because obviously he was meant to be our last hope, and that fell through. And then I think I was still questioning the necessity of courts and police. I said, okay, we get rid of everything, but we just still need to have courts, because without courts or police, things might run amok. And then I think it was with taxation, you have a series of endless excuses to expand the state. And, you mentioned this to me in person a couple of times, that political activism, how difficult that is. So I think since everybody is different, if we lived in a limited government society, since everyone's going to be different, they're going to have people put in their pet projects to expand the state, whether it's veterans benefits, whether it's, roads. So that's just going to be a series of countless excuses to have the state be expanded.
Yeah, I mean, once you have a state, it becomes a kind of a moral hazard. Everybody's grabbing onto the apparatus to have it do the thing that they want it to do. Especially in the area of courts and security and police, it strikes me that that's, in a way, the most dangerous power the state could ever possess. and yet
Right.
that's the one that we let it monopolize and reserve to it.
Yeah, I think that it's and in the worst parts of everyone. I think it's kind of circular to have everyone talks about. I mean, first of all, I mean, if you compare to the courts and the police to something even minimal like the post office, I mean, I I dread having to go into the post office or the DMV. They're just very basic things. But when you put something like that into the worst thing that you can have, I think it's just. I think what really it comes down to is that people, they hate the. If you were to go up to someone in the street, just a regular person, and it could be a neocon or a liberal, you could ask them, do you yourself want to be ruled? And in many cases, I like to think that most people would say no, they don't want to be ruled, but they don't trust others for being ruled. So it's like, they don't want to be ruled themselves, but they don't trust you. So them being ruled themselves is the inevitable security of that outcome. But having in
Yeah.
the worst thing, two worst entities are just completely circular.
Yeah, it's funny that you say that as you mentioned that. It's true in almost every area. Like when I think about the case of like education and homeschooling, people will often say, like, well, I think I could do a good job homeschooling my kids, but there's a lot of people out there that would just obviously screw it up, and that's why we need public schools. So people are always very interested in having the state sort of deal with problems that they imagine might be out there, but they don't know for a fact is out there. It's just a sort of distrust of the capacity of others to adapt and make good lives for themselves in absence of coercion.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of projecting going on because they're scared that even in certain cases that they might do it without all these laws, and that I think that it's like they seem that it's like certain people feel that they have some superhuman feat of meditation, superhuman strength that they don't go out and slaughter every single person that they see without saying it. And it kind of reminds me of that. What's her name? The girl with the long blonde hair who let her hair down. Rapunzel, isn't it?
Yeah, no, exactly right. Yeah, I agree with you. Yeah,
Her mother was telling her, inside here it's not everything that you want, but outside the castle, there's horrible people out there. You don't want to go out there. It's just so it just. I was actually watching that with my. I was actually watching that. I think it's a CGI animated movie with my niece.
yeah,
It's the same story, and my niece, she's able to pick up these same things that we're talking about. It's very common sense for them. But it's funny how you get older, you kind of let go of the whole don't steal other people's stuff to something like that. So, I mean, I was thinking to myself that if a 10-year-old girl can pick up the concepts, I just don't know why we all of a sudden forgot it.
Jeff, I totally agree with you. That the movie in question is called Tangled. And
Yes,
it's a great, and it's based on the old German folk story of Rapunzel, which in the original is a lot more, how do I say it, lascivious actually. But the movie is a great metaphor for how the state treats us. Exactly. We're stuck into this tiny room, and we're unhappy about it, and we wonder when's our life going to begin, and that sort of thing. But our masters are always telling us, oh look. You don't want to even think like that. It's terrible out there. You just want nothing to do with it. Terrible things will happen to you. Yeah, it's a beautiful story. I'm glad you seized on that. I totally agree with you.
yeah, and also another thing that I do, a year ago, and you knew me a year ago, I was a little bit more abrasive towards the limited government libertarians, but I think that what I've come to appreciate, and this has a lot to do with the infamous quote that you got bashed for about Rand Paul about saving your bandwidth. That I think that instead of actually engaging with limited government libertarians is that instead of just straight out calling them statists, I think a really great way is actually, instead of attacking them, is obviously, is asking them questions about, what do you have against anarchy or anarchism? And usually, for example, one of the biggest arguments that they'll raise is that people are bad. And so, if you come at them with, harsh criticism, they're going to be a lot more less likely to listen to you. So I think using arguments such as what Rothbard uses, Bastiat uses, or Knock uses, it can actually, or even in this case, Lysander Spooner with his highwayman robbery, are certain ways to kind of push the envelope with limited government libertarians. Because, for instance, with the people are bad, there's the counter argument to that, which is, if people are so bad, why do you want to put monopoly power in the hands of bad people? But a response to that is we just need to have the right people in charge. Now, you and I both have our grievances with that issue. But one great thing to kind of get people to think about is, let's say if we lived in a limited government society that every single person was the same. They didn't spend money on our politicians and spend money on bills that we didn't want. They didn't spend taxes. They didn't raise propose new legislation that we didn't want. Let's say if they matched our ideals 100%, then what's the difference between that and eliminating the middleman and governing ourselves? And so that's one of my main arguments in the article that I propose.
Yeah.
And, at that point, that starts to kind of get them to think a little bit. Yeah. So it's at that point where I start thinking, okay, well, you have a point. Let's start looking. What do you propose? And that's at that point where you're able to kind of, at least, even if they're not going to be convinced, because I'm going to assume that a lot of them are, but at least if they're not convinced, they're going to be able to start thinking a little bit differently. It's just all about planning what to do with it. Planning that in each individual.
I know in my case, once I embraced the possibility of a fully free society or the pure anarchist way of thinking, I could never go back again. It's like I held on for a very long time to the slight weird hope that we could have something like the most extreme limited state, based on a fear basically of chaos or something like that. When I realized that wasn't true, I remembered the distinct moment where I just intellectually let go, and that was a long time ago, and ever since then it's just been a real adventure. I mean, it's like once you let go in your mind of this fantasy of a public service-minded state that's going to do great things for the world that the market can't do, and start to look at reality and realize that the state is completely unnecessary and only causes harm to society and causes massive human suffering, and can't do anything else. It's actually a liberating experience, like intellectually liberating, that you can never go back on.
I think it's in a way kind of being born again, because you're kind of used to this institution, but once you kind of embrace it, it's kind of similar to actually being a 6-year-old it's able to take everything and start building your own blocks and figuring out what it would look like to you instead of what you're used to it looking like. So that's what it's kind of like.
Yeah, it's a beautiful moment. I'm not aware of too many cases of a person who's embraced anarchism who's gone back on it, actually. Sincerely and with conviction embraced anarchism, whoever went back on it, because it really is arriving at a beautiful truth, that permeates the whole of how you think. So anyway, thank you for helping people through the process. I'm going to try to link your article in this YouTube, so everybody should go and read it, because you're dealing with, 5 or 6 of the most common kind of reservations.
Yeah, and that's one of the most kind of basic ones. I also want to say, appreciate saying thank you for, Mindish, because what I addressed in the article is that in the very first section is before I get into the beef of the article is that, I think that everyone has their own niche in the libertarian movement, or if you want to call it the libertarian movement. Like Julia Borowski, she has her crowd. MK Lords has a crowd, like the Bitcoin crowd. So everyone has theirs. So this is kind of my own little niche is like, addressing this particular crowd. This is something that I've grown comfortable with. And of course, I'll address the status Keynesian anytime I can, but this is something that I've grown a little bit accustomed to. So thanks for kind of like.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I can tell you, I was very good friends with Murray and Murray Rothbard, and I can tell you that he would be thrilled to know that you've taken this up as your personal crusade. He always believed that it was absolutely essential in the end that people embrace anarchism as the perfect solution to all of our problems. What they do with it after that was up to them, but he always thought that making that intellectual leap was really essential. So I think he would just be thrilled with the work you're doing. So thank you very much, Jeff. I appreciate your hanging out with me today.
Of course, always a pleasure.
Okay, and I'll see you at Liberty.me.
All right, you too.
Thank you, friend. Bye-bye.
Bye.